It had been 9 years. 9 long years since I had last seen my family, since I had been erased from their lives as though I never mattered. I remembered the day it happened like it was yesterday, even though so much time had passed. It was a day like any other at first. My parents, my siblings, and I were gathered around the dinner table, eating and chatting as we always did. But that evening, something changed. I still don't know what triggered it, but suddenly, it felt like the atmosphere in the house grew thick with tension. My father's words cut through the conversation like a knife. "You're not one of us anymore," he had said, his voice cold and final. The words, the accusation, it stung in ways I couldn't even articulate. I wasn't allowed to stay, not in the house, not in their lives. It was like I no longer existed to them. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother didn't say a word. My siblings didn't meet my eyes. They all just looked at me like I was some kind of stranger who no longer belonged. With that one sentence, they had abandoned me. It wasn't just physical distance, it was emotional, psychological abandonment. I was erased. I had no choice but to leave, to walk away from everything I had known, everything I had built with them, my memories, my love, the moments I thought were sacred, became meaningless in the blink of an eye. I was cast aside without explanation, without even a chance to fight for my place in their world. For years, I struggled to understand why it happened, why I was so easily discarded. But over time, I had to accept it. I had to move on, to rebuild my life from scratch. I couldn't go back and change the past, but I could build my future. And so I did. Now, 9 years later, I had built something completely new, a life of independence, strength, and success. But there was still a part of me that couldn't let go of the family that once was. I had made my peace with the fact that they didn't want me in their lives anymore, but I couldn't shake the curiosity. What if I could go back? It was time to return. Returning wasn't something I thought would be easy, but I was determined to face the past. I had spent almost a decade building a life for myself, away from the shadows of my family's rejection. Yet, as I stood at the gates of our old family home, I realized how much I still cared, even after all this time. There was a magnetic pull, a deep ache that I couldn't ignore. I had to know, was there still a place for me in their lives? Or had they truly moved on, erased all traces of me from their hearts? I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the old, familiar gate that had once welcomed me home so many years ago. It felt almost surreal, as though I was walking into a dream. Could I really go back after everything that had happened? Could I still be a part of this family after all the years of silence? With one last deep breath, I walked up to the front door and knocked. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited. Every second felt like an eternity. Would they even recognize me? Would they remember me? Would they turn me away again, as they had all those years ago? The door creaked open, and there stood my mother. Her face was older, the lines of time etched deeply across her forehead. She didn't seem surprised to see me, but her eyes, those eyes that had once looked at me with so much love, now held an unreadable expression. For a moment, we just stood there, looking at each other. Strangers bound by blood but separated by years of silence. "Mom," I said, my voice breaking as I tried to fight the emotions welling up inside me. "It's me. I know it's been a long time, but I needed to see you. I needed to know if there was any chance we could start over." Her eyes softened for just a moment, and I thought, maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment we could heal. But then, just as quickly as the softness appeared, it was replaced by the cool, guarded expression I had seen in her face the day I left. "You shouldn't have come," she replied, her voice low but firm. "After everything, you think you can just walk back into our lives like nothing happened? After all this time? You were gone, and we moved on. It's not that simple." The words hit me like a physical blow. Gone. That was how they had seen me, as if I had never mattered. The same words they had used to erase me from their world were now echoing in my mind, tearing at the fragile hope I had built up in my chest. I stood there trying to find the words, to explain everything that had happened in the years since. The pain, the loss, the struggle of making it alone in a world that had rejected me, but nothing came out. How could I explain the years of silence, the loneliness, the bitterness that had festered inside me? Before I could speak, my mother stepped back, closing the door halfway. "I don't think you understand. It's too late for apologies. It's too late for all of this." The door began to close, and in that moment, I knew. I had come back only to be rejected once more. The years, the pain, the growth. I had hoped it would change things, but the truth was, nothing had changed. They had moved on. And I, like a fool, was still clinging to the past. But even as the door closed, a small spark of defiance ignited inside me. I wasn't going to let this be the end. I couldn't let it end like this. I had worked too hard to get to where I was now, to have everything crumble because my family couldn't forgive me. This wasn't over. I turned around and walked down the path, a wave of frustration and sadness flooding over me. But beneath it all, there was a quiet determination. I had come back to prove something, not just to my family but to myself. And though they might not see it, I was going to make them regret their decision to erase me. I wasn't finished yet. This was only the beginning of my journey, and I was going to show them, even if it meant doing it without their approval, that I could be more than they ever expected. The days after that encounter were heavy. I spent hours walking around, lost in thought. The rejection from my mother, the cold dismissal, it all weighed on me. But one thing was clear. I couldn't let this defeat me. I wasn't going to leave again. I spent the next few weeks focused on something that had always been my escape: work. Over the years, I had built a career from scratch. I had established myself as someone who could succeed on my own without the support of my family. But even though my professional life had flourished, my personal life had always been a void, a hole that no amount of success could fill. Yet that void was now forcing me to confront something that was deeper than I had ever realized. My need for my family, the yearning to be accepted, to be seen for who I truly was, wasn't something I could ignore anymore. I had spent so many years convincing myself that their rejection didn't matter, that I didn't need them. But now, standing on the outside looking in, I knew I had been lying to myself all along. I began reaching out to old friends, people from my past who had known me before everything fell apart. Some were surprised to hear from me, but others welcomed me back with open arms. Slowly, I rebuilt my network, not just for business but for personal connection. It wasn't the same as family, but it was a start. They treated me as if I still mattered, as if I was more than just the person my family had abandoned. The more I connected with others, the clearer it became that I had been incomplete without these relationships. Family, though important, wasn't the only source of love and support. I had started to find a new sense of belonging, but as much as I tried to move forward, something inside me still nagged at me. The memory of my mother's words, the door closing on me, wouldn't leave. I needed closure. I needed to know if there was any chance of mending the bridge that had been burned so many years ago. I couldn't leave my past behind without knowing if it was possible to make peace with it. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for them to come to me. I would go to them one last time. This wasn't about begging for their approval or forgiveness. It was about getting the answers I deserved. I wasn't asking for everything to go back to the way it was, but I needed to know whether I was still a part of their world or if I had truly been erased forever. I reached out to my father this time. I wasn't sure if he would even take my call, but I had to try. The phone rang several times before he picked up. His voice on the other end was distant, but it was still familiar. "Dad," I said, trying to steady my voice. "It's me. I need to talk to you. I think it's time we have an honest conversation." There was a pause, and I could feel the weight of his hesitation. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone sharp but not dismissive. "I just want to understand," I replied. "What happened all those years ago? Why did you choose to cut me out of your life? And why, after all this time, have we never spoken about it? I've carried this for so long, and I need to know where I stand." He was silent for a long moment, and for a second I thought he might hang up. But then finally he spoke. "You don't understand," he said, his voice softer than I'd heard in years. "It wasn't that simple. We didn't want to push you away, but you made decisions that were hard for us to accept. We thought we were helping you by giving you space to figure things out, but we didn't know how to reach you after that. It wasn't just you. We were all broken in different ways." I was stunned. This wasn't the response I had expected. It wasn't an apology, but it was a window into a side of my father I had never seen. He wasn't the angry, cold figure I had remembered. There was vulnerability there. There was regret. "I'm sorry too," I said, my voice trembling now. "I didn't understand how much I was hurting you all, but I'm here now, and I want to find a way to move forward. Even if it's just for us to understand each other, that's enough." Another long silence followed, and I wasn't sure if the conversation had made a difference. But then my father spoke again, his voice quieter, as if the walls he had put up were beginning to come down. "I don't know where this will lead, but I think we can start again. I can't promise everything will be the same, but I'm willing to try. For you." For the first time in years, I felt the smallest spark of hope. It wasn't an easy fix, and I didn't expect things to be perfect, but it was a step, a small one, but a step nonetheless. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I had made the right choice by coming back. The weeks that followed were filled with awkward silences, hesitant steps, and long conversations. It was clear that both my father and I were trying to rebuild something that had been broken for too long. But every conversation brought us a little closer. Every meeting softened the barriers that had separated us for years. We started small, family dinners, casual visits to the house. My father would ask how work was going, and I would talk about the challenges and successes I'd faced. Slowly, the conversations grew less formal, and we began to talk about things that weren't just surface level. We spoke about regrets, missed opportunities, and the things we had never said. But there was still one person I hadn't spoken to, the one who had, in many ways, been the catalyst for all this pain. My mother. I had tried reaching out to her several times after my conversation with my father, but she always avoided me. I knew it wasn't because she didn't care. It was because she was still hurt, still holding on to everything that had happened. She had been the one to push me away all those years ago, and I needed to understand why. I needed closure, not just from my father, but from her. After days of contemplation, I decided to visit her. I didn't expect an easy conversation, but I knew it was necessary. I had already come this far in trying to rebuild the family that had abandoned me. Now, I needed to face my mother and figure out if we could truly heal. It was a quiet afternoon when I arrived at her door. I knocked, and for a long moment there was no answer. I stood there, my heart pounding, wondering if I should just turn around and leave. But then, the door opened slightly, and there she was. My mother, older, quieter, but still unmistakably her. Her eyes softened when she saw me, but there was hesitation in her gaze, as though she was unsure if she was ready to open that door to me. I could feel the years of silence pressing down on both of us. "Mom, I need to talk to you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated, but then stepped aside, silently inviting me in. We sat at the kitchen table, and I could feel the weight of everything that had been left unsaid between us. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice quiet. "I don't even know where to start. But I've spent the last 9 years trying to understand why you did what you did, why you chose to cut me out of your life, and I need to know if there's any chance to fix this, if there's a way back." She looked at me for a long time, her eyes searching mine as if trying to find the right words. Then, finally, she spoke. "I thought I was doing what was best for you," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "We thought if we gave you space, let you figure things out on your own, maybe you'd come back when you were ready. But I was wrong. I didn't know how to reach you after that. I didn't know how to fix it." Her words were a balm to a wound I had carried for so long. She hadn't abandoned me out of malice. She had been trying to protect herself, protect me in the only way she knew how. But in doing so, she had driven a wedge between us that neither of us knew how to bridge. I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were, she continued, her voice filled with emotion, but I want you to know that I've missed you, and I'm so sorry for what happened. I should have fought harder for you. You were never a disappointment to me. I just didn't know how to help you when things fell apart. Hearing her say those words, knowing she hadn't thought I was a disappointment, was like a weight lifting off my chest. The hurt and anger that had built up over the years started to dissolve. My mother, the person who had caused me the most pain, was the one who was offering the first step toward healing. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking, "I've missed you too. I've spent so much time feeling angry, but I know now that it was just because I didn't understand. I didn't understand why you shut me out, but I want to understand, and I want us to try again." For the first time in years, I felt the real possibility of reconciliation, not just in words, but in action. There were still many conversations ahead, and there was still a long road to walk, but in that moment, I realized something important. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone anymore. I had already rebuilt myself from the ground up, and now all I needed was to rebuild the relationships that mattered most. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be perfect, but I had come back to try, and for the first time in 9 years, I felt like I wasn't alone anymore. I had a chance to make it right. Over the next few weeks, my mother and I continued to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy. The wounds from the past ran deep, and we both had our share of fears and doubts, but we also had a mutual understanding that we needed to try. Every conversation, every shared moment brought us a little closer to healing. I didn't expect everything to fall into place overnight. Trust had to be rebuilt, and so did the connection we had once shared. But every time we sat down for dinner together or had a long conversation about life, I felt like we were slowly stitching the fabric of our bond back together. It was fragile, but it was real. Meanwhile, my relationship with my father also began to evolve. After our initial conversation, he started to show more openness, though it was still difficult for him to fully accept what had happened. But he was trying, and that was all I could ask for. He hadn't completely closed himself off. We were both learning how to move forward. The family dynamic wasn't the same as it had once been, and I didn't expect it to be. I had changed, and so had they. We were no longer the same people we were when I left, but the fact that we were trying to come together again was a victory in itself. One evening, as we all sat together in the living room, my mother, father, and siblings, I felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. We were not perfect, far from it, but we were moving forward. We were no longer defined by the pain of the past, but by the possibility of a new future. My father cleared his throat and looked at me, a serious but softened expression on his face. "I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened all those years ago," he began, his voice heavy with emotion, "but I know one thing. I'm proud of you. You've done something I never thought possible. You've rebuilt your life from nothing, and I admire that. I'm sorry for the way we treated you, and I can only hope that we can rebuild what we lost." Hearing those words from him, after everything that had happened, felt like a quiet victory. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was enough. It showed me that change was possible, that even the deepest wounds could begin to heal. My mother reached over and placed her hand on mine. "I've learned a lot, too," she said softly. "I thought I was protecting you by letting you go, but now I see how wrong I was. I've missed you, and I want to make up for the years I lost. I'm here now, and I want to make things right." In that moment, all the hurt, all the years of pain, seemed to melt away. The future wasn't certain, and there were still many hurdles ahead, but the foundation had been laid. We weren't perfect, but we were together. And that was enough. Looking around at my family, I realized that this wasn't just about going back to what we had. It was about forging something new, something that was stronger because we had faced the truth, confronted our mistakes, and taken the necessary steps to heal. I had come back to get answers, but in the process, I had learned that the true value of family wasn't in perfection or the past. It was in the ability to grow, to forgive, and to love despite the mistakes. I didn't need to be erased anymore. I was a part of this family, not because of what I had been, but because of what we were building together, now and in the future. And as I walked out the door that evening, knowing that our journey was far from over, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The healing had begun.